Okay. Seeing that the time is 2 o'clock, I just want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Turlock Sub-Basin two technical advisory committees. My name is Herb Smart.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we hear you.
Thank you.
Oh, hey, Matt. So welcome everybody. Quick ground rules that you see here on the screen. The first is that, if you're on the phone and not using the Zoom feature, you could use *6 to toggle mute or unmute, *9 to toggle raising and lowering your hand. We're going to have public comment. We'll get to that in a minute on the normals portion of the agenda. That is welcomed if you have comment, and we'll take comment as well during the agenda items that we have, the specific items. Use the chat function if you can. I'll try and monitor that the best I can. Or as I mentioned earlier, raise and lower your hand using the Zoom feature that I think many of us are familiar with by now. We're recording the meeting, and I will post meeting materials as soon as possible during the call. I think namely, we're going to have a presentation from some of the consultants on the GSP, and I'll get that up as soon as possible, and I'll try and notify everybody in the chat. But apart from that, I will yield the floor so the meeting can begin.
Thank you, Herb. This is Michael Cook. I'm the chair of the Westerlux Sub-Basin GSA, and I co-host this meeting with Sarah Wolf, who's the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee for the East Turlock GSA. So if you haven't been to one of these before, we kind of go back and forth as a two-ring circus, but do most of our actions together. So the first item for me is calling to order the Westerlux Sub-Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency Technical Advisory Committee. Right now, I see I have a quorum, and correct me if I'm wrong. We've got Michael and Debbie from TID, Leandro from Delhi, Walt Ward from Stanislaus County, Mike Pitcock, City of Waterford, representing Hickman, David Odom from Denair Community Services District, Karen Morgan from City of Ceres, and Lacey from Merced County. Am I able to count you, Lacey? I'm trying to remember. And we've got Miguel from Modesto just joined in, and Curtis from Hillmore County Water District. So with that, I have more than a quorum. So at 2:02, I call the meeting of the Westerlux Sub-Basin Technical Advisory Committee to order. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Michael. Likewise, we appear to have a quorum. So we have Walt Ward from Stanislaus, Lacey McBride from Merced, and Matt Beeman from Merced Irrigation District.
On my cell phone.
Oh. So we have a quorum, and I call the East Turlock TAC meeting to order at 2:03.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. First item on the agenda for action is item number 3, approval of minutes. Minutes were circulated around earlier in the week, and then on September 16th, minutes were circulated for the September 16th meeting. And then once again, we recirculated an update or amended minutes to include comments made by the East Turlock Sub-Basin coordinator, Mike Tietze, regarding the model as it relates to minimum thresholds and adaptive management. So those amended minutes were sent out earlier this week. Does anybody have any corrections or changes to the minutes? We're adopting minutes from September 16th as amended, and yeah, September 16th is amended. And if we want, we can also take the minutes from September 23rd. So anybody on the Westerlux want to take an action to adopt the amended minutes from September 16th and the minutes from September 23rd?
So moved, Curtis.
Curtis from Hillmore, a motion.
I will second.
And who seconded?
I will second Michael. Leandro.
Leandro from Delhi. So those are the minutes as amended for September 16th and the minutes from September 23rd. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, those two sets of minutes stand approved. Over to you, Sarah.
And we would need to take action on the same two sets of minutes, September 16th and September 23rd as amended. So can I get a motion to that effect?
I move approval. Walt Ward.
Thanks, Walt.
Second for Matt.
Thanks, Matt. And then I will do a roll call vote for the East Turlock. Walt Ward,
Aye.
Matt Beeman,
Yes.
Lacey McBride,
Yes.
and Sarah Wolf, yes. Motion carries.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Moving on to public participation. This is the time set aside on the agenda for any member of the public to talk to the Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest within our purview. You can make comments about agenda items now, or you can save those comments to the time in the agenda when we get to those items. I know, Mr. Dreckmeyer, you had some comments you wanted to make as under public participation, and you had a slide to share. Would you like to do that now, sir?
I think it would be more appropriate under item 7.
Okay, absolutely. So we'll remember under item 7 to make that available to you.
Thank you very much.
No, no problem, sir. Any other general comments for the Technical Advisory Committee right now? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item number 5, which is budget update. And first is 5A, overview of revenues and expenditures for the West Turlock Sub-Basin Sustainability Agency. Over to you, Mr. Clipper.
Good afternoon, everyone. For September 1st, for the West Turlock account, we had $179,458.32. We ended the month with $176,028.32. Any questions for the West Turlock account? Moving on to the basin-wide account, for the month of September, we had very little activity. We're kind of in between, paid posted checks earlier and later than September. So we started out the month with $944,939.99, and we ended the month with $944,874.81. So that's where we stand with the basin account. Any questions? And then everyone should have their invoices, and we are collecting funds for that. And I believe I've spoken to everyone regarding that. So.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Any final questions for Michael? If not, I hand over to you, Sarah. Budget update for the East Turlock Sub-Basin GSA.
Thank you, Michael. For the East Turlock, at September 30, we had cash on hand of $246,136.45. Just had a board meeting today to pay bills, one of which is the East Turlock's portion for the completion of the GSP, which was for $37,513.60. And so that was just agreed to and will be mailed out this week. That's all for my report.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? Okay, hearing none, moving on to item number 6, and this pertains just to the West Turlock Sub-Basin GSA Technical Advisory Committee. This is adopting another resolution recognizing the state of emergency proclaimed by the governor, which allow us to continue to hold these meetings through remote teleconferencing. And this would cover the period of October 28th through November 27th. And we discussed this at our last meeting, that we're allowed to, on a 30-day basis, adopt this resolution to allow us to continue to teleconference these meetings. And given the great participation we get from all over the state, we recommend that we continue to hold our meetings in this manner going forward. And so any questions on that one? All right, so with that, I'll take a motion in a second. And because it is a resolution, we will do a roll call vote. But in the meantime, anybody like to make a motion to approve the West Turlock Sub-Basin GSA continue to hold its meetings via teleconference subject to the state authorization pursuant to the Brown Act?
This is Miguel Alvarez. I make a motion, Michael.
Okay, Miguel's motion from Miguel from City of Modesto. Do we have a second?
I will second, Michael. Leandro.
Leandro. Thank you, Leandro. So that's Delhi CSD. So with that, any further discussion? Okay, Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Member Alvarez,
Yes.
Member Juritzma,
Yep.
Member Maldonado,
Yes.
Member McBride,
Yes.
Member Montalbano,
Yes.
Member Odom,
Yes.
Member Pitcock,
Yes.
Member Ward,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morgan, Vice Chair Morgan, Chair Cook.
Aye. Okay, with that, the resolution stands approved. Thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on to the main event for today. Our projects and management actions and implementation actions. So we'll review and discuss the progress being made on the draft projects and management actions and implementation sections of the sustainability plan. So I know Ali and his team have been very, very busy, as have the ad hoc TAC groups. So over to you, Ali.
Good afternoon, folks. Just try to, there we go. Very pleased to be here again. Ali Tagavi with Woodard & Curran, and as part of the TAW team working on this groundwater sustainability plan. My colleague Dominic Amador is also on the line to help out, and I know Phyllis is also on the call to chime in as needed. We're very pleased to be where we're at in terms of finally presenting to you folks where we're at on the projects and management actions, as well as the implementation support activities, 2 chapters that are going to be part of the GSP. The first one is Chapter 8, Projects and Management Actions, and the second one is Chapter 9, Implementation Support Activities. Both of these chapters have been written up, and I believe they're going to be available, if not already, in a very short time to the TAC members for review. The PowerPoint slides that I have today is basically a summary of what's in those 2 chapters, and we would be looking forward to receiving your comments both today as well as after you receive the actual chapters and the text of the chapters. The work that is being presented has been, to be honest with you, on a very, very collaborative mode and a collaborative process between the West Turlock Sub-Basin GSA as well as the East Turlock Sub-Basin GSA, both at the staff and management level, but also along with the consultants for each one of the GSAs. And I really appreciate all of the effort that's gone into supporting us to get to where we're at today. So with that in mind, we are going to be talking about what's sustainable yield in the basin and what the effect and the impact of the projects and management actions are, as well as implementation support activities and how we plan, or at least have proposing to implement the projects and the management actions. Per the guidelines of the GSP and the regulations, the sustainable yield is defined as the maximum quantity of water that is calculated over a base period representative of a long-term conditions in the basin, and including any temporary surplus that can be withdrawn annually from a groundwater supply without causing an undesirable result. I've underlined several words in here because these are really key words that play a good and major role in how we define and quantify the sustainable yield, as well as how we intend to implement it. First of all, it's a long-term condition. So we're looking over approximately 50 years of hydrologic record that is a a replicate of the 1969 to 2018 hydrologic records, but we're using that same hydrology for projecting forward. We're also looking at potentially some temporary surplus. That means any recharge that we project forward in terms of the projects that we are implementing, that recharge that goes into the groundwater system and groundwater basin would potentially be available as part of the sustainable yield. And so that could potentially increase our level of extraction and pumping that may be available to the users in the basin. The withdrawal on an annual basis, that's basically just a long-term average annual withdrawal, but we need to recognize that the annual extractions and pumping from the basin can change on a year-by-year basis based on the hydrology. In dry years, we may be pumping more. In wet years, we may be pumping less. And in wet years, we may be putting additional water into the groundwater system, as we will talk in a few minutes as part of the projects. So there's no one set number of groundwater pumping that we're going to sort of stick to, but we will have variable pumping over time in the future. On a long-term average annual basis, though, we need to have a number that we can hang our hats on and we can plan based on, knowing very well that there will be variability from year to year. And of course, we want to make sure that the pumping that we make is not going to cause undesirable results based on what the regulations has defined. And these are the 6 undesirable or 6 sustainability indicators, I should say, that are spelled out in the GSP regulations. And where we are at is, of course, there is no seawater intrusion in the Turlock Sub-Basin, so we've already written that off. And the water quality is not directly evaluated based on the tools and technology that we currently have available to us. But we're going to be focusing on declining groundwater levels, reductions in the groundwater storage, surface water depletions, and then land subsidence. And most of these are going to be keyed on, as a proxy, basically, keyed on changes in the groundwater level. And so anything else is going to be assessed and evaluated based on the changes in the groundwater levels that we project forward. And all of these changes that we project forward are going to be relative to the baseline condition. And so we need to recognize that there is uncertainties associated with what we're projecting forward in terms of the baseline conditions, uncertainties with respect to the hydrology. We're repeating the same hydrology from past into the future, uncertainties with respect to the climate change, uncertainties with respect to population trends, growth trends, both on the urban side with population and urban water use, as well as with the agricultural sector, whereas, in terms of the cropping patterns that we're projecting forward, the acreages that we're projecting forward, the type of irrigation methodology and irrigation practices that we're projecting forward, all of that are all projected 50 years into the future. Of course, there's uncertainties associated with all of that. And so we need to recognize all of that. And we've debated over what the level of uncertainties are as we present the numbers and as we've documented that in the GSP. So with that in mind, then we've gone ahead and used a systematic analysis to estimate the sustainable yield. Like I said, it is using the latest state of knowledge that we have on the basin with respect to the hydrology, rainfall patterns, runoff patterns, operations of the reservoir, hydrogeologic conditions, and land and water use conditions. Again, projecting 50 years into the future based on the current hydroclimatic conditions. We did not, we did do a sensitivity analysis with respect to climate change, but we have not brought that into the picture with respect to the project and management actions. We're also assuming that the current reservoir operational rules are in place with the current understanding of the regulatory framework, but who knows what happens down the road in terms of the additional restrictions or changes in the regulatory framework. And so all of those are, again, part of the unknowns. And then we're also using the latest model that's been developed for the basin, the Central Valley simulation model for the Turlock and Modesto Sub-Basin. And so there's uncertainties associated with the simulation and the results of that model as well. So based on the current data, information, and knowledge that we have within the Sub-Basin, the sustainable yield is estimated to be 311,000 acre-feet on an average annual basis. Again, like I said, there is variability with respect to that. We're not keying on 311 on a year in, year out, but we are using that as a long-term average annual sort of guide to maintain in order to keep the basin into sustainable condition. So just to give you an idea on what that all means, this chart here is showing in green, it's showing the agricultural groundwater pumping for agricultural sector, and the yellow is showing the urban pumping for the historical condition for the past 20 plus years from 91 to 2015. And the blue chart in here is showing the variability in hydrology. Anything to the left of this chart, this bar here, is showing the historical conditions. And the bars to the right of the line here is showing the 50 years projected conditions. And the solid line, the red line, is showing the estimated sustainable yield of the 311. So this is giving you an idea of how we've done in the past, historical conditions relative to the 311 sustainable yield. Of course, we've been doing okay back in the 90s. Relatively speaking, but then as we started having additional developments, both on the ag and the urban side, and definitely during the drought conditions of the last drought conditions during 2011, 12 to 2015, there was significantly more pumping that was happening historically. Now, when we look at in the future, this is again under baseline conditions. We are projecting that even under the baseline conditions, if we assume the status quo and the projections that we have, both in terms of the agricultural use as well as urban growth, we will potentially be, well, we will most likely be violating the sustainable yield. And that is what we're going to be talking about today with respect to how we can bring these bars much more closer to what the red line is, which is a sustainable yield. So how to meet the sustainable, the Sub-Basin sustainability goal? We would like to look at projects and management actions. The regulations define projects and management actions as planned, as each plan must include a description of projects and management actions that the GSAs have determined will achieve sustainability goal for the basin. So we have that red bar, so to speak, or red line that we'd like to keep and maintain our pumping hovering around that over the long-term basis. The regulations also describe the PMAs to have these kind of features. The projects and management actions should be measurable. They have to have measurable objective and benefits. We need to define circumstances for implementation of the projects. There need to be public notice process associated with each project, quantification of the demand reduction for mitigation of overdraft. So if there is any demand reduction, which we have partly in this basin assumed, needs to be defined. Permitting and regulatory process that should go along with each one of the projects, timetable for initiation and completion of the projects, legal authorities, costs and funding, and any other input on water reliability and applicability of the projects during drought conditions. So each one of the projects that we've defined need to have these components expressed and defined and described for each one. So let me just sort of give you an idea of how we define the project. A project is defined as a physical construction or a structural feature that is going to be in place. So that is a recharge basin, that is a diversion structure that would support moving, say, wintertime or flood water, and so on and so forth. So those are projects. On the other hand, management actions are typically non-structural programs or policies that are designed to implement programs or incentivize actions that result in improvements in sustainability. So when we add the two together, we're talking about projects and management actions. And so together, we'd like to make progress towards meeting sustainability goals and measurable objectives for the basin, and also avoiding minimum thresholds as set at the monitoring wells, representative monitoring wells in the basin. So what do we have in terms of projects? We define the projects into 3 categories and 3 groups. Category number 1, or group number 1 and 2. Category number 1 was defined to be projects that are currently ongoing or are going to be in place fairly soon. That is the only one we have in the basin is right now the Stanislaus Regional Water Supply Project that the cities of Turlock and Ceres have collaborated and partnered with TID that is going to be in place. It's under construction. Category 2 is all of the other projects that are imminent and can be quantified and defined, and all of those items that I enumerated can be defined in terms of the regulatory requirement for those projects. We've defined 11 of these projects. So the Regional Water Supply Project is number 1 there, but we have another 10 projects that we have collectively between the east side and the west side have identified, quantified benefits of these projects, and we've gone ahead and analyzed these projects using the model to see what's the effectiveness of these projects in bringing the basin into sustainability. There is another good set of 12 projects that are in category 3, group 3. These projects are not quite as well defined. They're still at conceptual level, but they can potentially be very real if there's more work put into it, more definition and feasibility studies that can go into these projects so that they can also be used towards bringing the basin into sustainable condition. So here's a map of all of these projects in various locations. There's some of these projects that are on the west side and some of the projects that are on the east side also. They've all been located in here. And the chapter that has already or will be distributed shortly has details of each one of these projects. I think in the last TAC meeting, I presented details of each one of them with the features and the quantification of the capacity or volume of water that are intended for each one of these projects. And those are in the last TAC PowerPoint slides as well. So I'm not going, yes, please.
Just real quick, the number 1 on the map, I believe, is the SRWA project. I'm just wondering if that number 1 should be moved to where the actual project location is rather than downtown Turlock.
That is a very good point, Karen. Thank you
Okay.
for bringing that up.
I noticed that and I meant to tell you earlier, but I have my opportunity now. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'll make a note of that and we'll fix the map, definitely. Thank you. Okay, so how did we analyze these projects? There's like 11 projects, and then we also have another one which we call demand management, which is the balance of how all of these projects are not necessarily fully effective in bringing the basin into sustainable condition. So that balance needs to be also quantified, which is called demand management. And we'll talk about how we're thinking that could potentially be implemented. So we categorize these projects and group them into 5 scenarios. Scenario number 1 is intended only for the urban projects. So that's these first 5 projects. Scenario 2 is intended to be, you know what, there's lawnmower out there. So I'm going to put my headset on. If you can bear with me for 1 second, please. I'm sorry about that.
Can you folks hear me? Yep, you're coming in clear.
Yeah, we can, Ali.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. So scenario number 2 is combination. We basically cumulatively added projects to these scenarios. So scenario number 1 is only focused on the urban side. Scenario number 2 is the urban side plus the projects on the west side. Scenario number 3 is the urban projects plus the east side projects. And scenario number 4 is the cumulative of all of the urban, the west side, and the east side projects. And then scenario number 5 is the projects plus the demand management action, so to speak. So with all of that in mind, then we've gone ahead and evaluated these scenarios. And what we're going to look at today is basically this last scenario there, as far as what the bottom line is between the projects and management actions to bring the basin into sustainability. So looking at basically total, implementation of the demand management, we've again categorized and grouped the users into users who historically have used surface water and groundwater, a combination of surface water and groundwater. So that's TID and Merced ID, along with the riparian surface water users. And then those users who have historically been only on groundwater, we've combined all of those into one group as we went through an analysis of the projects and the demand management under scenario 5 there. So the other thing that we needed to keep in mind is that there is sustainability criteria, as we've discussed before. Sustainability criteria with respect to not only groundwater storage, and changes in the groundwater storage, but also groundwater chronic decline in the groundwater levels, as well as implications and impacts on the interconnected surface water for additional depletions of surface water. So I'm not going to belabor too much on this slide here, but just to let you know that we've assumed and decided that the fall 2015 would be the minimum thresholds throughout the basin to maintain at the representative monitoring wells for groundwater levels. For depletions of interconnected surface water, we've assumed that spring 2014 would be the minimum threshold along the Merced River, and along the Tuolumne and San Joaquin River, we're going to be looking at fall 2015 as the minimum threshold to maintain at these monitoring wells. And so I'm going to look at basically 3 major areas: the groundwater storage, the chronic depletion in groundwater levels, and then looking at the depletions in the interconnected surface water. So this chart here is showing, and you folks have seen this before, these are colorful depiction of the annual groundwater budget. To the negative side, we were looking at the groundwater pumping and any changes in groundwater storage, and anything that's above the 0 line here on the left-hand y-axis is all of the different inflows into the groundwater system, including the deep percolation, any recharge from the canals, and any seepage from the stream system and river system into the groundwater system. So when we add all of these up, there are times that we have excess storage, which makes it into the groundwater system, or we're withdrawing from the storage. And so over time, if you add the cumulative change in storage over time, gives you this solid black line. And so under the baseline condition, we notice that we're going to be continue to decline groundwater storage over time. That's red on the on the second y-axis here. So in order to bring the basin into sustainability under what we call scenario 5, which is the sustainable management scenario, then we had to implement both projects as well as demand reduction in order to bring the basin into sustainability. And that's what this chart shows, that you notice that under scenario 5, we're going to be actually not only maintaining the groundwater system as far as the storage is concerned within sustainable condition, but also increasing storage towards measurable objectives. So when we look at that, just the solid line that I showed you before, the black solid line is what was under the baseline condition. So we are depleting the groundwater storage, or we may potentially be depleting groundwater storage over time. But when we add the group 1 and group 2 supply side projects, we're going to be increasing groundwater storage based on the model predictions to the tune of just about leveling with only the supply side projects. However, there is a trick to this, because we need to make sure that we're hitting 3 major sustainability indicators, which is storage, groundwater levels, and then interconnected surface water. So the interconnected surface water is the one that is limiting, and it's setting up higher bar for us. So implementing additional demand reduction is required to get the basin into sustainability based on the sustainability indicator of interconnected surface water. And so that's what this green line is all about. So when we look at that same thing and same conditions under scenario 5, which is the sustainable management condition for chronic lowering of the groundwater levels, I'm showing in here 2 representative hydrographs in here. One, both of them are on the west side. You'll notice that the chart in here is showing the changes in groundwater level at this particular well, or the one next to it down here. But the various hydrographs in here are showing where we would potentially be violating the minimum threshold at that well, or this particular well in here, we would also be potentially violating it under the baseline. Under the sustainable criteria, sustainable management conditions, we're going to be raising groundwater levels to an extent that we would not be violating it as often. And so there's a 2-year consecutive violation of minimum threshold that would result in undesirable conditions or undesirable results. And so we need to make sure that we're not violating them more than 2 consecutive years. I have the same type of chart on the east side. On the east side, we have somewhat more challenge, because under the baseline, we end up violating the minimum threshold a whole lot more often under the baseline condition. And so as we implement the projects and management conditions, and as we get to scenario 5, which is this upper line here and upper hydrograph, we're not going to be violating the minimum thresholds anymore. And so we raise the groundwater levels at these 2 wells in here, which are 2 representative wells in the basin. Then the third sustainability indicator that we need to look at is wells which have indicators for us with respect to the interconnected surface water. And in this case here, we have to key in to wells which are indicators for the Merced River at fall 2014. And so to that end, we have minimum thresholds that are set at fall 2014. This is the dashed line in here, the dashed red line. And so we oftentimes under the baseline condition would be potentially violating the minimum threshold. And so in order to maintain the basin in sustainable conditions, we need to raise groundwater levels again by implementing projects and management actions to bring groundwater levels high enough to meet the criteria for this indicator. Based on all of the analysis, what we have landed on is, and we did numerous analysis in order to look at what is the pumping reduction or net groundwater reduction that needs to take place beyond the projects that would bring the basin into sustainable condition. And that ends up to be, you know, we tested out 20% reduction, 25%, 30% reduction, and with all of the reasonable projections, as well as considering all of the various uncertainties embedded in the data, in the modeling, in the analysis, and the projections, we've landed on a 25% demand reduction that may be needed in order to bring the basin into sustainable condition on top of the projects that are on top of project groups 1 and 2. Now, if we bring in project group number 3 into the picture, that would basically reduce the amount of pumping reduction that's required. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well.
Yeah, Ali, I think you have a question.
Sorry. So keeping that in mind, then, like I said, 311,000 is the total average annual long-term estimated sustainable yield in the basin. Approximately 31,000 acre feet or so is the long-term benefits or long-term average annual quantity of water that can be that is available from Group 1 and Group 2 projects. The state 31,000 gives us approximately a net benefit of about 23,000 acre feet to the basin. And so that's the net project benefit. So the bottom line is that our sustainable management pumping is going to end up to be approximately 334,000 acre feet once we implement these projects in here. So what that means is, in order to implement the projects as well as the demand management, again, we've used the best available technology that we have. We still need to potentially look at refinements of the data and projections in terms of any gaps in the data or in the monitoring program and so on. Within the first 5 years, we need to make sure that we can get a whole lot more data to firm up these numbers. And also the compliance is evaluated through observation. It's not going to be through modeling. It's not going to be through, you know, paper analysis. It's going to have to be through monitoring to make sure that the basin is brought back into sustainability. And last but not least, the important key is to have adaptive management. And to that end, I have a slide on it. What is an adaptive management? Once we have implementation of these project group 1 and 2, then we need to continue monitoring the state of the basin and collect more and additional data and information, recognizing that there are uncertainties throughout the planning process and throughout the implementation process. The uncertainties, like I said, are going to be based on rainfall conditions, the actual climatic conditions out there, the actual use of the water for both the urban sector as well as the ag sector, and then eventually performing an analysis to reevaluate the performance of these projects. How do these projects in real time help bring the groundwater levels higher in order to meet the sustainability criteria for the basin? All of that is going to be folded into your annual reports, not only for the basin, but also to report back to the DWR. So the annual reports are going to have to report on the state of the basin on an annual basis, which would also help us understand the data gaps, also understand the performance of the basin and the performance of the projects over time on an annual basis. It's important to assess the viability of the Group 3 projects that we talked about. Those are still at the conceptual level, but we need to make sure that there's due diligence and investments done in performing additional feasibility studies on these projects and make sure that these projects can also be put in place in order to meet the sustainability of the basin and, of course, bring the bar lower in terms of any pumping reduction or any demand reduction. Having said that, though, based on all of the analysis and even looking at the project group number 3, there still needs to be some conservation measures and some demand reduction that needs to go in place in terms of both that's just the nature of how this basin can come into the sustainability. And we'll be talking about that in just a minute as to what that all may entail. So how do we look at these management actions and demand reductions? Of course, the first category is demand reduction, which means reduction in groundwater use and groundwater pumping by voluntary conservations and or land fallowing potentially, and any other conservation measures and conservation practices, both on the urban side as well as on the ag side. Majority of it is going to have to be on the ag side because that is the major sector that is using groundwater. Additional pumping management framework that can go in place over the long haul are groundwater extraction reporting programs and pumping allocation and groundwater allocation and pumping management programs that can can be implemented, as well as extraction fees and pumping credit market and trading programs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And last but not least is also domestic well mitigation that needs to be put in place and evaluated over time to make sure that domestic wells are not adversely impacted. So how does a demand reduction strategy work? And the demand reduction is to be implemented in a conjunction with the projects, and part of it is going to be on a voluntary conservation and land fallowing, which entails assessing options and develop a program that enacts strategies in close coordination and collaboration with the landowners for repurposing of lands, lands growing maybe lower value crops, and or maybe having dry farming or potential rotation of the fallowing of lands, and also potential use of these lands for recreation, repurposing of them for habitat improvement, groundwater recharge, and other purposes that would benefit the basin. On the other hand, we also are thinking that there needs to be additional conservation practices that can go in place, creating programs to support use of the conservation practices, both on the urban side as well as on the ag sector. And these need to be evaluated over time through the urban plans as well as the ag water management plans for looking at the different areas, as well as careful consideration to be given to issues surrounding depercolation of the seepage and unintended consequences of consumptive use. Pumping management framework is something that has also been looked at for 4 different management actions that can be implemented in an adaptive mode. And not all of these may need to be implemented by one GSA, but the GSAs are going to be working together to look at groundwater extraction reporting, groundwater allocation and pumping management programs, groundwater extraction fee programs, as well as, like I said, the credit market. So all of that needs to be all defined over the first few years of the implementation of the GSP in order to have a much better handle on which one of these are most appropriate in an adaptive management mode to be implemented in the basin. So when we look at all of these projects and management actions together, I just want to give you a perspective of what how that can help bring the basin into sustainability. I just showed you this chart before. This is a chart of showing the groundwater pumping per the baseline, meaning no actions, no projects, or no implementation of any management actions. And so you'll notice that under the projected conditions, we would still potentially be pumping above the sustainable yield, estimated sustainable yield. This other chart here is similar to that, except for the future conditions, which is anything past this solid line in here, is the groundwater pumping would drop down as a result of both projects that are potentially going to be implemented, the Group 1 and Group 2 projects, as well as the management actions that have been perceived for implementation. So if we do that, there's not only for the most part, we're going to be hovering around this lower line here. We're going to have a range of 311 to 334,000 acre feet of sustainable yield estimate. We're going to be hovering around that during dry years. These are dry conditions. Dry years again, this is replicate of 76, 77, 87 to 92 conditions, and also the last drought conditions. We're going to be probably pumping somewhere above the sustainable yield, but in many of the wet years, we're going to be below sustainable yield. So overall, we're going to be maintaining a fairly good and healthy basin over the long haul if we implement these projects. And this is only at this point looking at project groups 1 and 2, as well as pumping reduction to the tune of the 25% that we've estimated. Now, if there is project group number 3 that would be implemented, that can shave off part of that demand reduction and can be evaluated to see how effective those group number 3 are going to be. But all of that is in the context of long-term implementation of the GSP and the projects and management actions. The last piece that I wanted to share with you folks is any anticipated steps that we need to take in order to mitigate any impacts on the domestic wells, coordination with existing programs, and assessing the needs for well registration, excuse me, sharing information between local drinking water programs and well drillers, or on anticipated water levels, and monitoring areas of domestic well information gaps, and targeting the GSP projects in areas of potentially vulnerable wells, and developing a multi-tiered, perhaps 3-tiered, but maybe multi-tiered corrective action plan for potential domestic well mitigation. So a little bit more on adaptive management and how the management action, especially demand reduction, can potentially be implemented. Like I said, currently we're estimating approximately 25% reduction in groundwater pumping in order to bring the basin into sustainability on top of the first 2 groups, group 1 and 2 projects. But if their group 3 projects are viable and they can potentially be put in place, that is going to shave off of that 25% demand reduction with pumping management framework and also reduction strategies. And so what does that look like? I wanted to appreciate my colleague, Mike Titze, who put this together. It's very telling on what conceptually a demand reduction and projects and management actions can look like. I'm going to pause for a minute. I see a hands up by Amanda. Would you like to share your thoughts at this point, Amanda?
Sure. Can you hear me, Ali? Oops. Yeah, I don't think he can hear us still. And I know there were other questions too, so. Shoot.
Have I lost folks? Hello?
It looks like Ali's about ready to find out that he can't hear. He's seeing the chat now, so just hold your question, Amanda, and we'll get to it pretty quick.
All right. Yeah, and I know there are other questions.
Hear me?
Ali, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, you folks can hear me. I cannot hear you. Sorry. Let me see how I can make this work.
Ali, can you hear me?
Okay, can you folks hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you.
Hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay. I don't know what's going on. Okay, I'm back on. Hopefully you folks haven't lost most of what I said, right?
No, we heard everything you said, Ali. We just couldn't ask questions because you.
Oh, I'm sorry about that because I couldn't hear you for some reason. So go ahead and I'm going to pause here, Michael, and maybe entertain some questions.
That sounds good. So I think, Amanda, you were talking a minute ago, you and then somebody else on the 916 cell phone line was going to talk too. So Amanda, why don't you go and then we'll get the person on the phone line next.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Ellie. That's all looks good. We're really encouraged to see a domestic well mitigation program on the list of management actions. That's very exciting and encouraging to see that y'all are really going to be actively trying to protect drinking water for folks. That's really wonderful to see. I did have a question, well, the specifics of the program look good. We'll definitely want to, we'll definitely support with feedback to help shape whatever corrective action plan or help ensure that residents can weigh in so that a program will really be tailored to their needs. But it all looks great from what you've said. I was wondering though, I understand you're planning to do adaptive management, as are many GSAs. So would the domestic well mitigation program be, sorry, what's my question? Are you going to, is that something that y'all are definitely going to do, or is it going to be on the back burner? We would want to make sure that it's prioritized.
As described in the chapter, so this is part of the chapter, and it is going to be part of the plans, the projects and management plan to make sure that domestic wells are not impacted. In terms of adaptive management, like I say on this slide in here, there's a lot of data gap, as you can imagine, in terms of where the domestic wells are, what the depths are, what the capacities are, the age of these wells, the pumping capacity, the bowl setting, and so on and so forth, and how much they're pumping, and so on and so forth. So there needs to be a lot more information gathered on the domestic wells to educate the GSAs and help the GSAs bring the best and most suitable and appropriate level of protection and mitigation, and be able to manage the basin in a way to protect and mitigate any impacts. So without information, that's going to be a tough one to shoot in the dark, so to speak. So the adaptive management is going to be specifically geared towards that, to make sure that we can fill in the data gaps, understand enough about the various domestic wells throughout the basin, and be able to adapt the plans accordingly.
Great. Yes, and I definitely understand that there are some severe data gaps regarding domestic wells everywhere in California, really. So I appreciate that. Do you think we would encourage the GSA to go ahead and start doing something to help mitigate or prevent impacts? Because it will likely take a while to gather all of that data and have really exact specific data for all domestic well users. But in the meantime, we really recommend that the GSA go ahead and do something and be getting towards prevention and protection, even while we don't have completely accurate data. So thank you, Ellie.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, Mike's iPhone, your hand is up. There you go, it's Mike Tietze.
Yeah, hi. So I was the one who dialed in on the 916 number before and then hung up because I was hoping to be able to get through. But no, this is fine. So more of a comment, and maybe you can weigh on a little bit too, Ali. You mentioned it, but I think it bears pointing out that the way that we envision this working on the east side is that you've used the best available tool to assess what's needed. There's still some uncertainty, but we can say with pretty good confidence that if we implement all the group 1 and group 2 projects, that there's still going to be a gap, and that gap is the 25%. And I just want to be clear that folks understand that gap will be met by a combination of group 3 projects to the extent that we can implement them, and the adaptive demand reduction. And the reason that the demand reduction has to be adaptive is because we have some uncertainty that we've correctly forecast the basin conditions, and climate can be variable, but also, we don't know how effective the group 2 projects are going to be. And we don't know how many group 3 projects are going to be implemented and how effective they'll be. But we think we can do better than what's been forecasted because we do have group 3 projects in the pipeline. So I just wanted to make that clear that, this 25%, we shouldn't automatically think of as a demand reduction, but it's the forecast of what we expect the gap may be that needs to be filled by additional projects and demand reduction.
Well said, Mike. Thank you for clarifying that. And you said it much better than I said it. I appreciate that. But yes, the goal is to make sure that past implementation of group 1 and group 2 projects, there's that gap, 25% gap, that to bring us into sustainability. And part of that can very well be met by the group 3 projects to the extent that those would be implemented, plus any additional demand reduction or demand management that needs to be put in place. And that all is not necessarily just following land or reducing pumping. That could be partly conservation measures, improvement in irrigation practices, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I just thought it was important to be really clear on that. So not meaning to beat a dead horse, but I don't think that we can say that too much. I mean, what's being asked of folks is hard, and I think folks need to know that it'll be done, adaptively and smartly, and that we, to the maximum extent that we can, we want to maintain local control, which means implementing as many projects as we can to get there.
Well said. Thank you.
Okay. I think Mr. Dreckmar, you had a question and maybe a slide you wanted to share in this part of the agenda. Maybe this is a good time right now.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, I think this has been a great presentation, and it's exciting what can be done when you have the money. And I want to talk about a possible source of funding, which I think could be very reliable, and that's the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. They would be willing to help fund projects in Stanislaus County because it's a lot cheaper to save water or to recharge water there than in the Bay Area. And I'm not suggesting selling water to them. I'm suggesting that you could sell them an insurance policy that they would fund a number of projects, and you would guarantee them if they ever got really, really low on water, you'd be there to make sure that Silicon Valley didn't go dry. And the reason this would be such a great opportunity for TID or MID or the groundwater sustainability agencies is that the SFPUC is extremely conservative. They are planning for what they call the design drought, which combines the 6-year drought of record, 87 to 92, with the driest 2-year period on record, 76, 77. So they're looking at an 8-year drought. That's what they're planning for, with demand that's 25% higher than it is today. They're planning for demand of 265 million gallons per day, but it's been under 200 for the last 6 years. And a big reason for that is the price of water in the Bay Area has skyrocketed to pay for their water system improvement program, all the Hetch Hetchy upgrades in the Bay Area to make sure it was seismically safe. So the cost of water has tripled. It's now $2,000 an acre foot compared to, I believe in the TID area, it's about $20 an acre foot. So there's such a big difference that people are really, converting lawns to native species, et cetera. So I'd like to show you a slide here. And it says I cannot start screen share. So
no,
if Herb or someone could give me that.
Yeah, Peter. Ali, can you just take yours down and bring it back up when Peter's done? And then perfect. It should be able to work now. It only allows us one at a time. Good.
Got it. Okay, I just have this one slide. Thank you for letting me show it. So a colleague of mine put this together, and it's looking at the historic data, but also many years, probably 500 years of tree ring data to look at flows in the Tuolumne to determine the severity of droughts. And so each of these bars represents 8 years an 8-year sequence. So it starts with 1400 to 1407. The next one would be 1401 to 1408. And on the y-axis here, it's percent of average 8-year flow. So on average, if you have an 8-year sequence, it would be 100%. It'd be this line right here. And you can see that most of the other lines are, equally above or below. And over here on the far right, you can see, it's not just 1 year because these are 8-year sequences, but this is the general time frame of the 2012 to 2016 drought. Here would be 87 to 92. You can see there was a pretty severe 8-year sequence back here in maybe 1760. But this red line is the design drought, where it's just so much lower than anything else. It's 43% of the average 8-year flow. So that's what they're planning for. And the odds of that ever coming about are so small that they'd be paying a lot of money for an insurance policy that they probably would never use. Now, I've asked them, it's like, why aren't you partnering with MID and TID and the groundwater sustainability agencies? And they say, we would love to do that, but they haven't expressed interest before. And they just seem nervous about approaching anyone in Stanislaus County because they think that the mentality is if they have anything to gain, then others lose. And that's obviously not the case. So they've even suggested to me, it's like, hey, yeah, anything you could do to open doors, we would really appreciate that. So I'm here today, I guess, to play matchmaker and would love to talk with people, see if we can get this conversation going. I'm not sure if there are certain things that need to go into the sustainability plan by January 31st. But there's some good money in the Bay Area that could be used to help meet that 25% reduction. And they're eager to work with you. So thank you very much for the time to share that.
Thank you for the comments, Mr. Dreckman. I know that the plan as part of the PMAs, we're looking at a number of options in terms of groundwater storage opportunities. In some respects, the type of projects and the source of the supply hasn't been specified, kind of on purpose, as as we look to the long-term future. So thank you for putting that on our radar. Do appreciate that. Do you have any other questions on Ali's presentation there? It was very, very helpful presentation. I appreciate the follow-up comments from Mike Titsa too, because obviously you see numbers like, oh, this is how it's going to be. It's like, well, it depends, right? It depends how the group 2 and group 3 projects work out and how our just ongoing monitoring of the groundwater situation unfolds over time to see how easily or how hard it is to get to sustainability in the sub-basin.
So I have a few more slides, but I really want to show one last slide before we wrap it up, Michael, if we have time.
But we have plenty of time, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because that's one of the key slides that's going to be important in understanding where we're heading on these. Can you see my screen again, or?
Yep, we got it.
Okay, so this is a key slide, like I said, that Mike put together. I believe the East Side folks have seen this, but it's really important to understand what this is in terms of overall, schedule for bringing the basin into sustainability. And I'm going to just explain what the different colors mean for a minute here, and then we can talk about what the trends look like. So the blue in here is 100%, so to speak, a sustainable pumping. That means if these are percentages of the sustainable conditions. So if we're at 100% in here, that means we're going to be pumping at approximately 311,000. That's estimated projected sustainable yield, right? So anything above that is what is called or estimated to be unsustainable pumping. So if this is the first year of implementation of the GSP, we're still going to be somewhat higher than the sustainable condition. That's understandable, perfectly acceptable, but that's where we're going to be, right? As we march through time for the first 5 years, and by the way, we've broken this up into 5-year increments because the regulations call for updates of the GSP every 5 years. And so if we look at the 5-year increment over time, we can potentially reduce this unsustainable pumping by bringing in additional projects. These are projects that are Group 1 and Group 2 projects. So in this case here could be, for example, the Mustang Creek or the Upland pipeline that can be implemented over time depending on the state of the project, the hydrology, and how much water is potentially available from these projects, and so on and so forth. But assuming that these projects come online, it's going to shrink down what is unsustainable pumping, so to speak. Okay, and as we go through time, at some point, these project groups 1 and 2 are probably going to be at capacity. That's this the blue sort of striped blue color, and so we're still going to be short of bringing the basin into sustainable condition, and so we need to implement demand reduction, right? So as we march through time, there is going to be demand reduction that needs to be implemented over time. And so this is purely based on projects Group 1 and 2, which we've already estimated. And so at some point in time, over the course of the 20-year implementation process, by about year 15 or so, we may be at a point that we have all of the projects in place, and we're going to be having to implement management actions, demand reduction. However, if on this next chart here is showing not only the projects groups 1 and 2, but there's also opportunity to look at project number 3, which is this gray bar in here. And so project number 3 is going to shave off a good chunk of the project, the demand reduction. I apologize. Project number 3, group number 3 is also as part of this blue in here. So overall, the size of the projects that we can implement can definitely shave off of the demand reduction potential that needs to be put in place. And so I see, you know, the remark that, you know, Peter made just a few minutes ago can potentially go into these project group number 3 and be evaluated to see what sort of partnership, what sort of opportunities there may be over time. And so as a result, you know, if the first 5 years we were going to be evaluating all of that, who knows, maybe by year 5, when you have the update to the GSP, that particular project or any other projects can be conceptualized over time, can be evaluated in time to make sure that there's not a significant demand reduction that needs to be put in place, but the projects overall would meet the needs of the sustainability. So I'm going to leave it at that, Michael. The rest of this can, it's available for folks to look at, but I think this is the main part of the message that we wanted to send today to the TAC folks.
Thank you, Ali. I appreciate that. Just to clarify for the TAC, when we put the agenda together earlier, we didn't know if we'd be completely done with our review and that this chapter will be ready for adoption or recommended for adoption today. So that's why you saw an action item on the agenda. As you heard early on, we're not quite yet done, and we want you guys to weigh in on it. So that's why it's being routed around to members of the TAC to make some final edits. And if I remember correctly, Debbie, you're gonna have to help me out. When did we say the deadline was for making comments on those draft docs?
Yes. So we've asked for comments from the TAC to be returned by close of business on Wednesday, earlier if possible, because it gives us more time. We are in the process of trying to schedule a joint TAC meeting the week of the 8th to bring it to the GSAs. That's the current plan. So that's why the deadline. I know it's a lot to review in a short period of time, but we really appreciate the help in keeping on schedule.
Let me get a clarification. You said November 8th. Is that a joint GSA board meeting or joint TAC meeting?
It's the week of November 8th. We're targeting either the 8th or the 10th, I think, at this point in time for the joint GSA meeting. There is also a joint TAC meeting on the 4th of November.
Okay. So again, if we get those comments back by next Wednesday, we'd have time to get them on the next TAC agenda to recommendation, and then for the following week, get that out. Okay, got you. So just so everybody knows, obviously time's running out in the GSP hourglass, and down to the last couple of chapters here. So getting this done next week or so would be good. Again, a lot of the staff and consultants have worked incredibly hard the last week to put this together. It's almost done, but to get some final polishing comments from the rest of the technical advisory committee over the next week would be fantastic. And then we got that joint TAC meeting to look at the final product and recommend it to our boards to push out to the public. Hopefully we have a joint board meeting somewhere the week of November 8th. So that would be good. Anything else before we leave this item? Kind of the key, you got this whole GSP we've been working on, you get down to the last couple of chapters and you realize it's where the rubber meets the road. So again, thank you, Holly, and everybody else for participating. As Ollie mentioned, it's very collaborative between the West Turlock and East Turlock, put this final product together. So thanks everybody who's been working on this. All right. So no action. Hopefully we'll bring it back soon for action. So with that, we'll move on to item number 8, Sigma related updates. Our first item is communications and outreach. Mr. Smart.
Thanks, Michael. I just have one quick, actually, I'm looking at my notes, 3 quick items. The first of which you should see on your screen. We've been talking a little bit about this, and those who are on this call, it's no surprise to them, but we have another one of our, I believe this is our 9th groundwater office hours. We've traditionally held them at lunch, but tonight we're doing our first PM or prime time groundwater office hours. So we're not going to call them lunch hours, but we have a groundwater office hours tonight. We're covering some of the sustainable management criteria topic matter and monitoring networks at more of a informal discussion level compared to what's been done in the past by our consultants. And so we're going to have staff available to talk a little bit about where we're at in the process, talk a little bit about how people can be involved, stakeholders can get involved, and also to present on those 2 chapters. And so that's tonight from 6 to 7. Just wanted to mention that. Also, we have a draft chapter 3 that you'll recall, that's the notice and public communication chapter of the GSP. We have a draft of that is running its way through the technical advisory committee, and so it's been drafted, and we're looking to get that out for public comment sometime in early November or mid-November with other chapters in at a joint GSA meeting. So stay tuned for that. We're looking to get that out. Of course, it's going to need to be updated before the GSP is adopted anyway, because we have a number of metrics and tracking of meetings and social media and website and emails that will update at the last minute before we submit to the department. But we'll have those numbers as updated as possible before the public reviews that in November. And then the last item I have here is we're also working with the consultants that we're using through some state facilitation that we have to develop a public comment framework. For the record, currently I believe we have 5 public comment letters that have been sent in for related to certain chapters of the draft GSP chapters that are out. And so we have those 5, we've received them, and we're working through a public comment matrix where those are intaked, they're categorized, they're given to certain subject matter expert leads for potential response. And we have that working up on that. And so you'll start to hear more about that as we move forward, but that will also be something that's included as more of a technical piece of the GSP related to outreach. And so we just started working on all the nuances of that a week and a half ago. And so wanted to kind of let everyone know that we're working on that, and we'll certainly work together with the consulting team that's drafting the GSP for such revisions based on public feedback. So that is it for me, unless there are any questions or comments.
Anything for Herb? Doesn't sound like it. Thank you, Herb, for the report. Over to you, Debbie, on GSP schedule and grants.
Thank you, Michael. I just had a few things as we're wrapping up the GSP. We are developing a more detailed schedule for the next few months. so that everyone will be aware of when the meetings are and what we're working on, and we'll add to that as we identify additional things as we move forward. I'm going to bring that to the TAC at next week's meeting, so that'll be on November 4th. Sorry, phone call. Also, I wanted to let you know that the first meeting for the programmatic EIR project that's being funded under the Proposition 68 grant, the first meeting of the ad hoc committee that was formed by the TAC will be next Tuesday. The committee consists right now of Sarah, Mike Tietze, and Lacey for the East Turlock Sub-Basin GSA, and Karen Morgan, Michael Cook, Phil Gove, Michelle Harris, and myself for the Westerlux Sub-Basin GSA. And if any other TAC members are interested in participating, please let us know, and we'll forward the information for the meeting. And of course, we will be reporting back to this group as we continue to move forward with that process. I did forward the administrative draft of the projects and management actions to that team so they could begin that process. And we've been talking about them over time as we've been preparing for this. Also, I mentioned at our last meeting, I think that the monitoring wells that are funded under the Prop 68 grant have been postponed because we've had a difficult time obtaining the permits. Apparently, one of the checks got lost in the mail, and so we're working through trying to find that check, or perhaps reissue one. Anyway, we're hoping for December or January. Unfortunately, it's later than we had hoped, but that's the situation that we're in. And then finally, the GRAT is going through the final revisions, and we hope to have the final product here soon. So that's all I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Any questions for Debbie? Just to add to what Debbie was talking about there, she's developing kind of a detailed schedule for the next 2 months as we go through adoption and the various processes and procedures. Now, remember, the Westerlux Sub-Basin GSA and the East Turlock Sub-Basin GSA are both joint powers authorities, joint powers agencies. And so the only vote that counts for DWR is the vote taken by those two agencies to adopt the GSP. So there's no individual votes needed by the various agencies that make up those two GSAs. So, the city of Ceres doesn't have to take action, or, Keys CSD or something like that. But if you are planning on a presentation to your board, or you want to give them like a heads up before it gets adopted, that type of thing, please reach out to us. Let us know if you need any information or materials that will make your staff report or presentation easier or to get through. Recognize over time we've been working on this for a while, and some of your elected and appointed officials change over time and may not be up to speed on all the activities of the GSAs over the last couple of years. So if you need something, let us know. But recognize too, if you didn't have a chance to take it to your board, it doesn't matter, because again, the only vote for adoption that counts are the ones from the actual GSAs themselves for the purpose of Sigma. Hope that makes sense. And any questions for me on that? Okay, any from the East Turlock folks? Any updates? Anything you want to share before we move on?
No, nothing specific other than similar to your comments regarding the information and communication on what's in the GSP. We're happy to, if anyone in the East Turlock is interested in learning more, we're happy to help present to your board or to provide you with additional information on the GSP that we can explain and share with your groups if interested. So contact us.
Yes, sir. Sounds good. Okay, so item number 9, next meeting, and note a couple of things here. So due to the Veterans Day holiday on November 11th and the Thanksgiving holiday on November 25th, there will be no meetings of the Joint Technical Advisory Committee meeting on those days. But we have instead planned special meetings, as we've mentioned, for November 4th and November 18th. Okay. I know sometimes it's nice to get a break, but we are down to the wire here and we've got the last few things to do. We've got to keep the momentum going. It's been fantastic the last 30 to 60 days. So let's keep that up. So again, November 11th and 25th, no meetings, but we are planning meetings for November 4th and November 18th. And we'll, again, as more information comes out, we'll make sure everybody knows about that. Okay, with that, I would like to take a motion for adjournment from the Westerlux Sub-Basin Technical Advisory Committee.
Michael, sorry, just real quickly, Amanda asked just to clarify on those November 4th and 18th, if that's from 2 to 4 also.
Yes, it will be, Amanda. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, the normal time, same bat time, same bat channel, just a different day.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so with that, I'll take a motion for adjournment from the Westerlux Sub-Basin TAC.
I'll make a motion. David from Dinner.
Thank you, David. Do you get a second?
Second, Michael, Miguel Alvarez.
Miguel Alvarez from Modesto. You just beat Leandro to it. Next time, Leandro, it's yours, okay? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. The East Side, I would like a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Walt. And a second.
Second, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. And I'll do a roll call. Walt Ward,
Yep.
Matt Beeman, and Lacey McBride.
Yes.
And Sarah Wolf, yes. So we are adjourned as well on the East Side.